The champagne flute shattered against my temple with a sound like breaking dreams. I didn't feel the pain, not really. What I felt was the familiar weight of deja vu as blood trickled down my face, staining the white silk of my graduation gown the same crimson it had been in my last life. My sister Charlotte stood over me, her designer heel planted on my acceptance letter to Columbia's journalism program, the paper crumpling under her weight like my hopes had crumpled the first time I'd lived through this moment. "Did you really think you could embarrass our family like this?" she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my shoulder. "Publishing that pathetic little blog post about Dad's company? You're nothing but a jealous, attention-seeking brat." The crowd at my graduation party, my own graduation party, murmured their agreement. My father, Richard Blackwood, stood by the grand staircase of our family mansion, his face a mask of cold disappointment. My stepmother, Victoria, dabbed at fake tears with a handkerchief that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My younger half-brother, Marcus, filmed everything on his phone, probably already planning which hashtag would get him the most views when he posted my humiliation online. But this time was different. This time, I knew what came next. In my previous life, this moment had broken me. The blog post I'd written, a carefully researched piece about suspicious inconsistencies in my father's pharmaceutical company's clinical trials, had been my desperate attempt to prove myself as a serious journalist. Instead, my family had twisted it into an act of betrayal. Charlotte had convinced everyone I was mentally unstable, jealous of her engagement to Senator's son. My father had cut me off completely. Within 6 months, I'd been dead, poisoned by a contaminated batch of antidepressants that Charlotte had switched with my prescription pills, making my death look like suicide. But I'd been given a second chance. I'd woken up 3 months ago on my 22nd birthday, with all my memories of the next 2 years intact. Every betrayal, every cruelty, every secret I'd uncovered after my death when I'd existed as a ghost, watching my family celebrate my absence, I remembered it all. "You're right," I said, my voice steady despite the blood running down my face. "I am nothing." Charlotte's eyes glittered with triumph. She'd always been beautiful in that sharp, crystalline way that made people forget to look for warmth. "Finally, you admit it." "I'm nothing," I continued, rising slowly to my feet, "which is why no one will expect what's coming next." My father stepped forward, his voice cutting through the party chatter like a scalpel. "Sophia, you've embarrassed this family enough. As of tonight, you're no longer welcome in this house. Your trust fund is frozen, your credit cards are canceled, and your car will be repossessed by morning." In my last life, those words had destroyed me. This time, I'd been counting on them. "I understand, Father." I pulled out my phone, noting how Marcus stepped closer to get a better angle. "Perfect. Before I go, though, I should mention that I've already made other arrangements. You see, I knew you'd do this. Just like I know about the $17 million you embezzled from the employee pension fund. Just like I know about Victoria's affair with your business partner, James Chen. Just like I know that Charlotte isn't really pregnant with Bradley's baby. She's been faking it for 3 months to trap him into marriage." The silence that followed was absolute. Charlotte's face drained of color. Victoria's hand flew to her throat. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "You're lying," Charlotte whispered. "Am I?" I touched the wound on my temple, letting the blood smear across my fingers. "Tell me, Charlotte, why did you schedule an appointment at that private clinic in Switzerland for next month? The one that specializes in discreet solutions for delicate situations? Don't worry, though, Bradley will know all about it soon enough. After all, his father owns the Sentinel newspaper. You remember the Sentinel, don't you? One of the 12 failing newspapers I bought last month with Grandmother Blackwood's inheritance. The inheritance they didn't know about. The grandmother they'd told me was dead, but who had actually been hidden away in a nursing home by my father, slowly being poisoned by Victoria. In my last life, I'd never known she existed. In this life, I'd found her, saved her, and inherited everything she'd wanted to leave me. Nearly $30 million my father had been trying to steal. You couldn't have, my father said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. Those newspapers, they were worthless. Bankrupt. Exactly. Which is why no one noticed when I bought them through shell companies. The Sentinel, the City Tribune, The Morning Post, the Financial Daily, the Entertainment Weekly, the Political Review, the Technology Times, the Health Journal, the Education Quarterly, the Real Estate Report, the Sports Chronicle, and the Society pages. 12 newspapers that individually mean nothing but collectively reach 17 million readers across the country. 12 newspapers that are about to run simultaneous exposés on the Blackwood family's crimes, starting with tomorrow morning's editions. Victoria laughed, but it was high and brittle. No editor would run unsubstantiated gossip from a disturbed young woman. Disturbed? I pulled out a small recorder from my purse, the one I'd been carrying for 3 months, documenting everything. Like when you called Dr. Morrison last week to increase the dosage of Charlotte's anxiety medication without her knowledge, or when you told him to add antipsychotics to my prescriptions without informing me. I have that recording, Victoria, along with 73 others. I'd learned from my death. In my last life, they'd killed me with poisoned medication, making it look like suicide. This time, I'd been prepared. Every prescription, every meal, every drink. I'd tested them all. I'd documented their attempts. I'd built my case. Marcus, I said, turning to my half-brother who was still filming, you might want to stop recording, unless you want everyone to know about your little drug-dealing operation at Princeton. Oh, did you think those Bitcoin transactions were untraceable? I have screenshots of everything. Every buyer, every seller, every single transaction from the last 18 months. He dropped his phone like it had burned him. You're bluffing, Charlotte said, but her voice shook. You've always been weak, pathetic. You could never what? Never survive on my own? Never accomplish anything without the family name? I laughed, and it felt like freedom. You're right. The old Sophia couldn't. But the old Sophia died 6 months from now, murdered by her own sister. I'm not her anymore. I walked to the door, my bloodied graduation gown trailing behind me like a war banner. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. The first story breaks at midnight. That gives you 6 hours to prepare your lawyers. You'll need them. Sophia! My father's voice cracked like a whip. If you do this, you'll destroy everything. The company, our reputation, our entire legacy. Your legacy? I met his eyes, and for the first time in both my lives, I didn't flinch. Your legacy is built on lies, theft, and murder. I'm not destroying it, Father. I'm exposing it. There's a difference. As I walked out of the Blackwood mansion for the last time, I heard Charlotte scream, followed by the sound of more breaking glass. Let them rage. Let them scheme. They had 6 hours to try to stop 12 newspapers from printing the truth, and they would fail. I'd made sure of that. The valet brought my car, not the Porsche my father had given me for appearances, but a simple Honda I'd bought myself. As I drove away, I thought about the 2 years I'd lived after this night in my previous life. The homelessness after being disowned. The hunger, the desperation that had driven me to accept Charlotte's peace offering of a place to stay, not knowing she was slowly poisoning me. The gradual weakening of my body, the final agonizing days when I'd realized too late what was happening, and then the after. The strange, ghostly existence where I'd watched my family from the other side. Watched them toast my death. Watched Charlotte steal my unfinished novel and publish it under her name. Watched Victoria poison my grandmother while my father looked the other way. Watched Marcus expand his drug empire using our family's pharmaceutical connections. Watched them all prosper from my absence. But I'd also watched them when they thought they were alone. I'd listened to their private conversations, learned their secrets, discovered where they hid their crimes. Every affair, every bribe, every forged document, every hidden bank account, I'd seen it all, and when I'd awakened 3 months ago with all those memories intact, I'd known exactly what I had to do. The newspapers had been the perfect weapon. Not because they were powerful, they weren't. Most were on the verge of bankruptcy, desperate for any buyer. But that desperation made them cheap, and their failure made them invisible. No one pays attention to dying newspapers until they suddenly have something explosive to print. I'd spent 3 months preparing. First, finding and saving my grandmother, who'd been moments away from signing papers that would have given my father complete control of her estate. She'd been weak but lucid, and when I'd shown her the evidence of what Victoria had been doing, she'd changed her will immediately. The $30 million she'd left me had been my war chest. Then came the newspapers. I'd bought them quietly through shell companies and intermediaries, never letting my name appear on any document. I'd hired editors and journalists who'd been blacklisted for refusing to bury stories about powerful people. I'd given them resources, protection, and most importantly, the truth. Every document I'd copied from my father's study, every email I'd hacked from Charlotte's computer, every text message Victoria thought she'd deleted, every video from Marcus's cloud storage. 3 months of careful gathering, organizing, and verifying. 3 months of building an airtight case that would destroy them all. But the newspapers were just the beginning. I'd also reached out to the FBI about my father's embezzlement, the medical board about Victoria's prescription fraud, Bradley's family about Charlotte's deception, the DEA about Marcus's drug operation. The dominoes were all in place. The newspapers would just be the push that started them falling. I pulled into the parking garage of my new apartment, a modest place downtown that I'd paid for in cash. As I walked to the elevator, my phone buzzed with text after text. Charlotte begging, Victoria threatening, Marcus bargaining, my father demanding. I deleted them all without reading. I'd heard everything they had to say in my last life. My apartment was sparse but clean, nothing like the opulent prison of the Blackwood mansion. I'd furnished it simply, a desk, a bed, a wall of monitors showing the layouts of tomorrow's newspapers. Each front page screamed with headlines that would end my family's reign. Pharmaceutical giant Richard Blackwood embezzled millions from employee pensions. Socialite Charlotte Blackwood's fake pregnancy scandal rocks senator's family. Victoria Blackwood charged with attempted murder of elderly heiress. Princeton drug ring led by pharmaceutical heir Marcus Blackwood. I showered off the blood and champagne, watching the pink water swirl down the drain like the last vestiges of my old life. When I emerged, I found 17 missed calls from my father and a single voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Blackwood? The voice was calm, professional. This is Special Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI. We've received your package of documents. We'll be executing search warrants at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Please remain available for questioning. 8 a.m. 4 hours after the newspapers hit the stands. By then, my family would be in full panic mode, trying to do damage control while federal agents knocked on their door. The timing was poetic. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. There was one more thing to do. I logged into the blog that had started everything, the one that had led to my disinheritance in both lives. But this time, instead of a single post about clinical trials, I published everything, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence, all freely available for anyone to download. The newspapers would break the story, but the internet would preserve it forever. As I uploaded the files, I thought about the moment I'd awakened in this life, the disorientation of being 22 again, of knowing what would happen but being powerless to stop most of it. I couldn't prevent certain things. My father's crimes had been committed long ago. Victoria's affair was already in progress. Charlotte's schemes were already in motion. But I could expose them. I could ensure they faced consequences, and most importantly, I could survive. My phone rang. Grandmother Blackwood's name appeared on the screen. "Did you do it?" she asked when I answered. "It's done. The stories run at midnight." "Good." Her voice was stronger than it had been 3 months ago when I'd found her, half dead from Victoria's poison. "They deserve everything that's coming. Are you safe?" "I'm in the Swiss facility you recommended, surrounded by security and excellent doctors. Your stepmother won't be able to reach me here." "And after, when this is over?" "Then we rebuild, my dear. The Blackwood name doesn't have to die with their disgrace. It can be reborn, just like you were." After I hung up, I made myself tea and settled in to wait. The clock on my wall showed 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until my family's destruction began. 13 minutes until justice for my murder, even if no one else would ever know that's what it was. My phone buzzed with another text. This one was from Bradley, Charlotte's fiancé. "Is it true? About the pregnancy?" I sent him a single word, yes. His response was immediate. "The engagement is off. My father is running the full story." Another domino falling. By morning, Charlotte would have lost everything. Her fiancé, her reputation, her freedom when the fraud charges were filed. She'd tried to trap a man with a fake pregnancy, just like she'd trapped me with fake sisterly love before poisoning me. The parallel was too perfect to be anything but fate. 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes. I pulled up the security cameras I'd had installed in the mansion's vicinity. I couldn't see inside, but I could see the driveway. 3 cars were speeding away, my father's Bentley, Victoria's Mercedes, Charlotte's Lamborghini, running. They were actually trying to run. They wouldn't get far, I'd made sure of that too. Their accounts had been flagged by the FBI. Their passports had been frozen. Every airport, train station, and bus terminal had their photos. They could drive all they wanted. They'd never leave the state. 11:58 p.m. I opened my email and found messages from all 12 editors confirming their print runs. The Sentinel alone was printing 3 times their usual number, anticipating demand. The story of the century, they called it, the fall of the Blackwood Empire. 11:59 p.m. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, delivery trucks were already loading newspapers. In a few hours, people would wake up to the truth. The whole truth. Every dirty secret, every hidden crime, every cruel betrayal. Midnight. My phone exploded with notifications. The online editions went live simultaneously. Within seconds, the stories were being shared, retweeted, posted everywhere. #Blackwood scandal started trending immediately. My blog crashed from the traffic as millions tried to download the evidence. I smiled, remembering the last time I'd stood at a window at midnight. It had been in Charlotte's guest room, 6 months from now in my previous life. I'd been dying then. Too weak to stand without holding the wall, finally understanding that my sister had been poisoning me, but too late to save myself. I'd stood there wishing I could warn the world about what my family really was. Now I had. A knock at my door interrupted my reverie. I checked the peephole, a young woman with an FBI badge. "Miss Blackwood, I'm Agent Jennifer Park. Agent Chen sent me to ensure your safety. We have reason to believe your family might attempt to retaliate." I let her in. "They'll try. Charlotte especially. She's always been the violent one. We have agents watching them now. They won't get near you." As she set up her surveillance equipment, I returned to my desk. There was still work to do. The 12 newspapers were just the opening salvo. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the district attorney about pressing charges. Next week, I'd testify before the pharmaceutical board about my father's company's fraudulent trials. Next month, I'd appear before Congress to discuss the need for better oversight of the industry. But tonight, I simply watched the view counter on my blog tick higher and higher. 5 million, 10 million, 20 million. The world was learning what I'd learned in death, that the Blackwood family was built on bones and it was time for it to fall. Agent Park's radio crackled. "We have Charlotte Blackwood in custody. She was attempting to break into a chemical storage facility. Looks like she was trying to acquire concentrated potassium cyanide." Cyanide? In my last life, she'd used arsenic, slipped into my antidepressants over months. This time, she'd planned something quicker. She'd known I'd exposed her, but thought she could silence me before I testified. "Marcus Blackwood is also in custody," the radio continued. "Caught trying to destroy evidence at his Princeton apartment. And Richard Blackwood has barricaded himself in his office. We're negotiating his surrender now." "What about Victoria?" I asked. Agent Park checked her phone. "Arrested 20 minutes ago at a private airfield. She'd chartered a plane to Brazil." Brazil? No extradition treaty with the U.S. Victoria had always been the smartest of them, but not smart enough. I'd anticipated that move and had her passport flagged weeks ago. By 3 a.m., they were all in custody. By 6 a.m., their lawyers were scrambling to arrange bail hearings. By 9 a.m., when the morning news shows picked up the story, half the country knew their names and their crimes. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat with Agent Park and watched the empire crumble in real time. Stock prices for my father's company plummeted. The board of directors called an emergency meeting to remove him as CEO. Bradley's father held a press conference distancing his family from Charlotte. Princeton expelled Marcus. The country club revoked our family's membership. Every institution that had protected them, enabled them, turned its back the moment the truth came out. That was the thing about power built on lies. It only lasted as long as the lies did. As the sun rose over the city, my phone rang one last time. It was my father calling from federal detention. "Sophia," he said, and for the first time in both my lives, he sounded old. "Why? We're your family." "No," I said quietly. "Family doesn't murder each other. Family doesn't poison grandmothers or frame daughters or destroy lives for money and power. You were never my family. You were just the people I had the misfortune to be related to. Everything I did was for the family legacy. And look at your legacy now, Father. 12 newspapers, 17 million readers, all learning exactly what kind of man Richard Blackwood really is. This is your true legacy. The truth? You've destroyed us all, including yourself. You'll never recover from this scandal. The Blackwood name is ruined." "Good. I don't want it anymore. Grandmother and I will build something new, something clean, something that isn't built on the suffering of others." "You think you've won?" His voice turned vicious, the mask finally completely off. "You're nothing but a naive little girl who got lucky. You have no idea what you've started. There are people, powerful people, who are counting on my company's products. When they find out you're responsible for this, they'll what? Kill me? Like Charlotte did the first time?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silence. Then, "What are you talking about?" "Nothing you'd understand. Goodbye, Father." I hung up and blocked his number. Then Victoria's. Then Charlotte's and Marcus's. I deleted every photo, every text, every email from them. I wanted no reminders of my first life, no souvenirs from the family that had killed me. Agent Park looked at me curiously. "The first time?" "Just a figure of speech," I said, but I could tell she didn't quite believe me. By noon, I was at the FDA, presenting evidence of my father's company's falsified trial data. 17 drugs would be recalled. Hundreds of lawsuits would be filed. The company would declare bankruptcy within the month. By evening, I was back in my apartment, finally alone. The news was still playing on every channel. Reporters had gathered outside the building, but security kept them at bay. My phone had received over 1,000 interview requests. Book publishers wanted my story. Netflix wanted the rights. I ignored them all. The truth was out there. My job was done. That night, I finally slept, and I dreamed not of death or rebirth, but of the future. A future where I was truly free. The next months passed in a blur of trials and testimonies. I sat in courtroom after courtroom, repeating the truth again and again. Charlotte broke first, confessing everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. She admitted to planning to poison me, though she couldn't admit to succeeding since, in this timeline, she hadn't. 25 years in prison. Victoria lasted longer, maintaining her innocence until I produced the recordings of her discussing grandmother's poisoning with her personal physician. Life in prison. Marcus flipped on everyone, providing evidence against my father in exchange for a lighter sentence. 10 years with possibility of parole in 7. My father fought the longest and hardest. He hired the best lawyers money could buy. What money he had left anyway. But the evidence was overwhelming. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder by proxy. He was sentenced to 40 years. He'd die in prison, and we both knew it. The day of his sentencing, he caught my eye across the courtroom. His look said everything. Hatred, betrayal, disbelief that his youngest daughter had been the one to bring him down. I met his gaze steadily. My look said only one thing: justice. After the trials, I used the settlement money from the lawsuits to establish a foundation for investigative journalism. I hired the best reporters from my 12 newspapers and gave them a mission: expose corruption wherever they found it. No family would suffer what I had suffered. No criminal would hide behind wealth and respectability. Grandmother and I rebuilt the family name, but differently. The Blackwood Foundation became known for its integrity, its ruthless pursuit of truth, its protection of whistleblowers and victims. We sponsored journalism schools, funded independent media, created safe houses for those fleeing abusive families. Bradley came to see me once after everything had settled. He looked older, worn down by the scandal, even though he'd been a victim too. "Charlotte sent me a letter from prison," he said. "She still claims the pregnancy was real, that you fabricated the evidence. What do you believe?" I believe the woman who provided 70 pages of medical documentation versus the woman who lied to me for 3 years. He paused. She also said something strange. She said you knew things you couldn't possibly know, that you predicted things before they happened. Charlotte always was dramatic. She said you knew about the Switzerland clinic before she'd even booked it, that you knew about affairs before they happened, that you acted like someone who'd lived through everything before. I kept my face carefully neutral. Trauma makes people see patterns that aren't there. Charlotte needs someone to blame for her choices. I'm convenient. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Perhaps. Or perhaps there are things in this world we don't understand. He stood to leave, then turned back. Thank you for telling me the truth, for saving me from a lifetime with her. After he left, I wondered if others had noticed. The way I'd anticipated every move, the way I'd known exactly where to look for evidence, the way I'd saved grandmother just days before Victoria's final poisoning attempt. But even if they suspected something supernatural, what could they prove? That I was too prepared, too smart, too lucky? Let them wonder. I had work to do. 5 years passed. The Blackwood Foundation grew into an international organization. We exposed corruption in 12 countries, brought down 3 governments, and saved countless lives by revealing dangerous products before they could kill. Every victory felt like redemption for my first death. Charlotte wrote to me from prison once, a single line, I would do it again. I wrote back, so would I. And I would. Every choice, every revelation, every moment that led to their downfall, because justice isn't revenge when it's the truth. It's just the world finally seeing clearly. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. Weak, desperate for approval, willing to forgive any cruelty for the hope of love. She'd died believing that family meant something sacred, that blood bonds couldn't be broken by betrayal. She'd been wrong. Family isn't blood, it's choice. It's the people who stand by you when the world turns against you. It's the grandmother who changed her will to save you. It's the FBI agents who protected you. It's the journalists who risked their careers to print your truth. The Blackwoods had been my blood, but they'd never been my family. I kept one photo from my old life, not of them, but of me, taken the day before my first death. I looked so young, so hopeful despite the poison already in my system. Sometimes I talk to her, that girl who'd died and given me the chance to live again. I did it, I'd whisper. I got justice for you, for us. And sometimes, when the light hit just right, I swore I could see her smiling back. The newspapers I'd bought thrived under new management. The Sentinel became the country's leading investigative paper. The Morning Post won 3 Pulitzers. The City Tribune exposed a human trafficking ring that saved hundreds of lives. Those 12 failing newspapers became 12 beacons of truth in a world drowning in lies. I never remarried the way Charlotte had planned to, never had children to carry on the Blackwood name. Instead, I had something better, a legacy of truth that would outlive any bloodline. Every corrupt official exposed, every dangerous product recalled, every victim saved. They were my children, my immortality. Grandmother passed peacefully in her sleep 7 years after my rebirth. She'd lived to see 93, far longer than Victoria had intended. Her last words to me were, "You saved us all, especially yourself." At her funeral, I was the only Blackwood present. The others were still in prison, their requests for temporary release denied. I stood alone at her grave, but I wasn't lonely. The church was packed with people whose lives she'd touched through our foundation, people who'd never have known her name if I hadn't exposed the truth. As I placed roses on her casket, I made a final promise. I'll keep going. Every truth hidden, every lie told, every victim silenced. I'll expose them all. This is my purpose now. This is why I was reborn. The wind picked up, scattering rose petals across the cemetery. For a moment, I could have sworn I heard her laugh, young and free like she must have been before my father corrupted everything. But it was probably just the wind. The dead don't really speak to us, do they? 10 years after my rebirth, a young journalist came to interview me for a book about the Blackwood scandal. She'd done her research, read every article, every court transcript, but she had one question nobody had ever asked. "How did you know?" she said. How did you know exactly where to look, exactly what they'd do, exactly how to stop them? It's like you had a roadmap of the future. I smiled, the same smile I'd given Bradley, Agent Park, and everyone else who'd asked without really asking. When people show you who they are, believe them. My family had been showing me for 22 years. I just finally started paying attention. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Smart girl. Some truths are too strange for the world to accept. Some stories only make sense to those who've lived them. After she left, I stood at my office window, looking out at the city I'd helped clean up. Somewhere out there in a federal prison, my father was probably planning his appeal again. It would fail, like all the others. Charlotte was probably writing another letter proclaiming her innocence. It would go unanswered. Victoria was probably poisoning her cellmate with words instead of chemicals. And Marcus had actually found religion, last I'd heard. Prison does strange things to people, but I didn't think about them often anymore. They were the past, the first life that had ended in pain and poison. This was my second life, my real life. The one where I'd chosen justice over family, truth over blood, strength over submission. The phone rang. Another scandal somewhere, another family destroying one of their own, another truth that needed to be dragged into the light. This was my work now, my purpose, my reason for being given a second chance. Blackwood Foundation, I answered. How can we help you seek justice? As I listened to another victim's story, I thought about the 12 newspapers that had started it all. 12 failing businesses that nobody wanted, that everyone had written off as dead, just like me. But we'd both been reborn, stronger and more purposeful than before. The caller was crying now, talking about falsified medical records, about a family covering up a death, about being called crazy for trying to expose the truth. I knew that feeling. I'd lived it twice. We'll help you, I said. Send me everything you have, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. We'll verify it all, and if it's true, we'll make sure the world knows. After I hung up, I made a note in my calendar. Another investigation. Another family's crimes to expose. Another chance to save someone from the fate I'd suffered in my first life. Some might say I was obsessed, that I was stuck in the past, reliving my trauma through other people's pain. They were wrong. I wasn't reliving anything. I was rewriting it. Every corrupt family I exposed, every victim I saved, every truth I brought to light, it was all proof that my rebirth hadn't been wasted. The sun was setting now, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere, in 12 newspaper offices, editors were preparing tomorrow's editions. The Blackwood scandal was old news now, replaced by fresher tragedies and newer corruptions. But those newspapers remained vigilant, watching for the next big truth that needed telling. I thought about the moment I'd died in my first life. The pain, the betrayal, the desperate wish for just one more chance to make things right. Whatever force had granted that wish, God, karma, the universe's sense of justice, I'd made good on it. I'd taken my second chance and turned it into hundreds of second chances for others. My reflection in the window showed a woman 10 years older than when I'd been reborn, but infinitely stronger. The scared girl who'd craved her family's approval was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is revealing the truth, no matter how much it hurts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new corruptions to expose, new victims to save. But tonight, I stood in my office surrounded by the evidence of justice served, of truth revealed, of a second life well lived. The 12 newspapers had been my weapons, but the real power had always been simpler. The truth, properly timed and expertly revealed, could destroy any lie, no matter how powerful the liars. Charlotte had been right about one thing in her letter. She would do it again if given the chance. But so would I. Again and again, as many times as necessary, until every Charlotte, every Victoria, every Richard and Marcus in the world faced justice for their crimes. Because I'd learned something in death that most people never realize in life. Family isn't sacred just because it's family. Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is expose them for what they really are. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me read it. Thank you. Your story gave me the courage to expose my own family. I'm free now. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. This was why I'd been reborn, not just for my own justice, but to light the way for others, to show them that survival was possible, that truth was stronger than blood, that sometimes destruction was the first step toward rebuilding. I saved the message in a folder with hundreds of others just like it. Letters from survivors, from victims who'd become victors, from people who'd found strength in my story to tell their own. This was my real family now, strangers bound by shared pain and mutual courage. The cleaning crew arrived, vacuuming around me as I worked late into the night. They were used to finding me here, the woman who'd brought down the Blackwood Empire and used its ashes to build something better. They didn't know about my first life, about the death and rebirth that had started it all. To them, I was just a dedicated woman with an unusual story. If only they knew how unusual it really was. As midnight approached, always midnight, the hour of endings and beginnings, I finally closed my laptop and prepared to go home. Not to the Blackwood Mansion, that monument to greed and cruelty, but to my simple apartment where no one had ever tried to poison me, where every meal was safe and every breath untainted. Before leaving, I looked at the wall of newspapers, all 12 front pages from that fateful night 10 years ago. They were framed now, historical artifacts of the moment everything changed. 12 newspapers that had been dying until I'd given them the story of a lifetime. 12 truths told simultaneously, creating a chorus too loud to ignore. The elevator descended, carrying me past floors of investigators, journalists, and lawyers, all working to expose the next big scandal. The Blackwood Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined in those desperate months after my rebirth. We were a machine now, perfectly calibrated to drag secrets into the light. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy. People living their lives, unaware of the corruptions festering in boardrooms and family estates. But we were watching. We were always watching. And when the time was right, when we had enough evidence, we'd strike with the force of 12 newspapers and the weight of absolute truth. As I drove home through empty streets, I thought about the title the young journalist had proposed for her book, The Girl Who Killed Her Family Twice. She didn't know how accurate that was. In my first life, they'd killed me. In my second, I'd killed them back. Not with poison or violence, but with something far more devastating, their own actions, exposed for all to see. My phone rang one last time. The caller ID showed a federal prison. I knew who it was before I answered. "Hello, Charlotte." "I'm getting out soon," she said, her voice rough from a decade of prison. "Good behavior. Thought you should know." "I know. I also know about the apartment you've rented under a fake name, the hair dye you've ordered, the new identity you're planning to assume." Silence. Then, "You're still watching me?" "I'm watching all of you. Forever. Try anything, and the world will know within hours." "I just want to disappear, start over like you did." "I didn't disappear, Charlotte. I became more visible than ever, and you don't get to start over. You get to live with what you did, who you are, forever." "You're cruel," she whispered. "No, I'm just not dead this time." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. I hung up before she could respond. Let her wonder, let her fear. Let her spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when I'd expose her next crime. It was so much less than what she'd done to me, but it would have to be enough. My apartment building came into view, ordinary and safe. As I parked, I noticed a young woman sitting on the steps, hunched over a laptop. She looked up as I approached, and I recognized the exhaustion in her eyes, another victim, another family's cruelty to expose. "Are you Sophia Blackwood?" she asked. "Yes. I need your help, my family. They're trying to have me committed to steal my inheritance. I have proof, but no one will listen." I sat beside her on the steps. "Tell me everything." As she talked, I thought about the circular nature of justice, how one exposed truth led to another, creating ripples that never really ended. My rebirth had been the stone thrown into still water, and these ripples were my legacy. By dawn, we had a plan. Her family would face the same fate as mine: exposure, humiliation, justice. The 12 newspapers were gone now, absorbed into larger publications or transformed into digital platforms, but their spirit lived on in every story we broke, every corruption we exposed. The young woman left as the sun rose, hope replacing despair in her eyes. I'd given her what no one had given me in my first life: belief, support, and a plan for survival. Inside my apartment, I finally allowed myself to rest. 10 years since my rebirth. 10 years of justice. Thousands of lives saved or avenged. It wasn't enough, it would never be enough, but it was a start. On my nightstand sat a single pill bottle, the antidepressants I'd been prescribed after the trauma of my family's downfall. I'd never taken a single one, too haunted by memories of poison disguised as medicine. But I kept them as a reminder. Trust nothing, verify everything, and never let your guard down. As sleep finally took me, I dreamed of my first death again. But this time, I wasn't alone. All the people I'd saved stood with me, an army of the vindicated and the avenged. Charlotte was there too, but powerless now, forced to watch as her victims rose up against her. "You can't kill us all," Dreamy told her. "Every time you destroy one of us, 10 more learn to fight back. That's your real legacy, Charlotte. You taught us to survive." I woke to my phone ringing, another scandal, another family's secrets to expose. I smiled as I answered. This was my life now, my purpose, my reason for being given a second chance. Every call was a new opportunity for justice. Every exposure was another nail in the coffin of corruption. Every saved victim was proof that my rebirth hadn't been in vain. The 12 newspapers might have been the weapon that destroyed the Blackwood Empire, but they'd become so much more. They'd become a symbol, a rallying cry for everyone who'd been silenced by powerful families. "Remember the Blackwood 12, people would say when encouraging others to speak up. Remember what one woman with 12 newspapers could do? As I dressed for another day of war against corruption, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to either version of Sophia Blackwood, neither the naive girl who'd died of poison, nor the angry woman who'd first been reborn. This was someone new, forged in the fire of justice and tempered by 10 years of righteous battle. This was who I was meant to be. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Another pharmaceutical company caught falsifying data. Another family dynasty crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. Another reminder that the work we'd started with 12 failing newspapers had grown into something unstoppable. I thought about my father, alone in his cell, watching his life's work crumble. About Victoria, surrounded by women she'd tried to manipulate, finding herself outmatched. About Marcus, praying to a God he'd only discovered after losing everything. About Charlotte, free but forever marked, unable to escape the shadow of her crimes. They'd thought they'd killed me. In a way, they had. But in killing the weak Sophia, they'd created something far more dangerous, a woman who knew their every secret, who'd seen death and returned with a mission, who'd turned 12 dying newspapers into weapons of mass destruction aimed at corruption everywhere. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Blackwood, the Washington Post is on line 1. They want to partner with the Foundation on a major investigation." The Washington Post, one of the few papers that hadn't been failing when I'd bought my 12. Now they wanted to work with us, recognizing the power of what we'd built from those dozen dying publications. "Put them through," I said. As I took the call, negotiating another alliance in the war against corruption, I thought about the poetry of it all. I'd been reborn to destroy my family with truth. But in doing so, I'd been reborn again. Not as a victim or even as an avenger, but as something more. A guardian, a protector, a bearer of truth in a world that desperately needed it. The executive from the Post was talking about resources, reach, impact. I half listened, already knowing we'd accept. Every alliance made us stronger. Every partnership extended our reach. Every new connection was another tool for justice, but my mind was elsewhere, thinking about that moment 10 years ago when I'd stood in my graduation gown, blood running down my face, and made a choice. Not just to survive, but to ensure no one else would suffer what I had. It had seemed impossible then, a fantasy born of trauma and desperate hope. Now it was reality. The call ended with promises of follow-up meetings and shared resources. Another victory, another step forward. But there was no time to celebrate. There never was. Every moment spent congratulating ourselves was a moment someone else spent suffering in silence. My assistant knocked. Your 3 o'clock is here. The woman whose children are being poisoned by their stepfather. Another Charlotte. Another Victoria. Another family destroying itself from within. But this time, the victim wouldn't die. This time, she had the Blackwood Foundation. She had the legacy of 12 newspapers and 10 years of exposed truths. She had me. Send her in, I said. As the woman entered, tears streaming down her face, clutching evidence of her family's betrayal, I saw myself from both lives. The victim I'd been and the warrior I'd become. I took her hands in mine, feeling the circle complete itself once again. You're safe now, I told her, the same words I'd wished someone had said to me in my first life. We're going to expose them all. Every secret, every crime, every cruelty. They think you're weak because you're alone. They're wrong. You have an army now. She sobbed with relief, with recognition, with the dawning realization that she would survive this. As I comforted her, I thought about the 12 newspapers one last time. They'd been my weapons, yes, but they'd also been my redemption. Through them, I'd transformed from victim to victor, from murdered to murderer of lies, from the girl who'd died believing in family to the woman who'd lived to redefine it. The newspapers were gone now, absorbed into the larger mechanism of justice we'd built. But their spirit lived on in every story we told, every truth we exposed, every life we saved. 12 failing newspapers had become 12,000 victories against corruption. And we were just getting started. The woman in my office was calming now, ready to begin the long process of documenting her family's crimes. I opened a new file on my computer, labeled it with today's date and a case number. Another investigation. Another family about to face justice. Another chance to prove that Rebirth wasn't just about second chances. It was about making sure everyone got their first chance at truth. As she began her story, I listened with the patience of someone who'd heard it all before and the attention of someone hearing it for the first time. Because every story mattered. Every victim deserved justice. Every family hiding crimes deserved exposure. This was my life now. Not Sophia Blackwood, the pharmaceutical heiress, not the girl who'd been murdered by her sister, not even the woman who'd brought down an empire with 12 newspapers. I was something simpler and more powerful. I was the truth, incarnate and unstoppable. And the truth, as my family had learned, always wins in the end. The woman finished her initial statement as the sun set once again over the city. Another day ending, another investigation beginning. The cycle continued, would always continue, as long as there were families hiding crimes behind wealth and respectability. As she left with promises to return tomorrow with more evidence, I stood at my window one last time. The city lights were beginning to twinkle, each one representing a life, a story, a potential truth waiting to be told. Somewhere out there, another girl was being poisoned by her family. Another grandmother was being slowly killed for her inheritance. Another victim was being gaslit into believing they were crazy for seeing the truth. But also, out there were the 12 newspapers' descendants. Thousands of publications, platforms, and people dedicated to dragging secrets into the light. The network I'd started with those failing papers had grown into something beautiful and terrible, a machine for justice that couldn't be stopped or corrupted. My phone buzzed with a final message of the day. It was from the young journalist writing the book about the Blackwood scandal. She had one last question. If you could do it all again, would you change anything? I thought about it for a long moment, then typed back, I'd buy 13 newspapers. Because 12 had been enough to destroy my family, but 13 would have been enough to destroy everyone who'd enabled them. The doctors who'd looked the other way, the lawyers who'd helped hide the money, the society friends who'd known but stayed silent. But 12 had been what I could afford, what I could manage, what I needed. And they'd been enough, more than enough. They'd been everything. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and prepared to go home. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new truths to expose, new lives to save. But tonight, 10 years after my rebirth, I would rest knowing that I'd kept my promise to the girl who died of poison in her sister's guest room. Justice had been served. The truth had been told. And the 12 newspapers that nobody wanted had become the foundation of something that would outlive us all. As I locked the office door behind me, I whispered a final goodbye to the girl I'd been in my first life. She could rest now. Her death hadn't been in vain. Her suffering had become the seed of justice for thousands. And her rebirth? Well, that had changed everything. The elevator descended toward the lobby, and I thought about Charlotte's words from prison. I would do it again. So would I, Charlotte. So would I. Except this time, I wouldn't need to die first, and this time, I'd already won.